I'm sure that you saw that there is an over-the-counter pill that was now approved by the FDA. So maybe we'll cubbyhole that conversation,
Sure.
the interesting one.
Sure.
But what's happening when you're on the pill there?
Great question. So millions and millions of women take the birth control pill. And in fact, what I see in terms of a trend is that women are being prescribed the birth control pill at older and older ages as a way of dealing with perimenopause and menopause. And I do not believe that that is the right approach. So what's happening in terms of mechanism of action is that you're blocking ovulation with the birth control pill. So the birth control pill contains a synthetic estrogen, a synthetic progesterone known as progestin, and that those two together block ovulation. They do a few other things too, like they make the cervical mucus thicker, so it's harder for sperm to penetrate the cervical mucus. We haven't talked about the cervical mucus cycle as a subset of the menstrual cycle, but that's another phenomenon. And those are the main effects in terms of mechanism of action of the birth control pill. Side note, I believe that the birth control pill is the number one endocrinopathy or hormone problem that clinicians cause in the female body. So the issue with the birth control pill, on the one hand, some hail it as a feminist invention because it gave women more choice and it gave them more reproductive freedom. So amen to that in terms of what happened in the 1960s and 1970s. But when I was taught to prescribe the birth control pill, I was never taught to give full informed consent, to tell people, for instance, that, okay, I'm going to prescribe this birth control pill. It's going to deplete you of B vitamins. It's going to deplete you of magnesium. So you need to take extra amounts of this, either from your food or from a supplement. It's going to increase the inflammation in your body by about 2 to 3-fold, as measured by a biomarker like C-reactive protein. And so that may or may not register as a problem for you, but you might have some weight gain associated with it. It's going to lower your free testosterone. So the great irony here is that a lot of women take the birth control pill because they want to have sex and they want to have reproductive freedom. They don't want to get pregnant. And yet they are losing their libido because their free testosterone is lower. And then probably the most important part of the informed consent is that when you lower the free testosterone, and I'll explain how this happens in a moment, it can shrink the clitoris by up to 20%. So that's why I think the birth control pill is the number one endocrinopathy that is iatrogenic, meaning caused by the person prescribing the birth control pill. And just a quick mechanism of action, when you take oral estrogen, which is usually ethinyl estradiol in the birth control pill, that raises something called sex hormone binding globulin, which is kind of like the sponge that soaks up free hormone. So when you go on the birth control pill, sex hormone binding globulin rises, and that soaks up free testosterone. And there are some women who have a low level of free testosterone. They still have good libido. They don't have any vaginal dryness. They do just fine. I think of them as having the Prius type of receptor for testosterone. It just keeps on going, regardless of a low level of fuel. And then there are people who have the more Hummer type of receptor for testosterone. And you drop below a certain level and they're like, I have no sex drive anymore. I have vaginal dryness. Why is this happening? I'm 23. So I think it's important to realize that there's a lot of risks associated with the birth control pill. That's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah. So it sounds like that in my case, if your daughters were interested in taking the birth control pill or even trying to force you to let them take the birth control pill, let's
That's
say.
more accurate, yes.
This is completely hypothetical, of course.
Right.
And a father were to relent for various different reasons, that potentially supplementing either with exogenous supplements like magnesium or a B complex vitamin might be advisable in that case, or making sure that they're getting excess of that in food.
That's right. So I have a food first approach. I think that's the best way to go. It can be difficult, especially with B vitamins and with magnesium, to get enough from food. But, if you're really into wheat germ and foods that contain magnesium,
Walnuts.
go for it. But what I find in terms of depletions is most people need a supplement, and that's where a multivitamin can be helpful. The other point I want to make about the birth control pill and this issue with free testosterone is that there was one study that was done looking at women who stopped the birth control pill, and they looked at the sex hormone binding globulin levels, and they found that they did not go back to normal a year later. And that really raises my hackles, because women are not being told about this. They're not receiving full informed consent. And we really don't know the long-term consequences of how we're changing the menstrual cycle and the hormonal milieu that women are meant to have. So it's a little lower than it was when they were on the birth control pill, but even a year later, it's still elevated.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this interview from the Commune podcast, then click subscribe and check out this video right here.